Kevin, LCR and the LCRR is top of mind for everybody these days. I have not seen something come along in the water, wastewater industry or market that has been as discussed as this. I mean, maybe back in the day there was arsenic. Right now there's PFAS, but a big topic of discussion that I have we have talked about on the show, that we hear about all the time is LCRR. So, exciting show here. We do have a special guest that we're going to go off of a former conversation that we've had, former discussions. We're going to shed some more light onto where we are now. We promised our readers, we promised our users, we promised our listeners and viewers that we would revisit the topic so we can bring everybody up to date as to where things stand and what everybody should be doing from here. So, man, it is exciting to have this guest with us today. For all of you out there who don't know, I'm Travis Kennedy, publisher here at Water Online. This is the Water Online Show, and I'm joined, as always, by my illustrious co-host, Mr. Kevin Westerling, Senior Chief Editor of Water Online. Kev, we have another good show lined up.
Sure do. You added senior in there. I don't know, a senior chief editor, but I'll take it.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you passed your junior level exams, so you know your stuff. Maybe not as much as our guest about LCRR, which is why we have her here today. She is none other than Kristin Epstein. She is the Northeast U.S. LCR Compliance Coordinator for CDM Smith. Kristin, thank you very much and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we're approaching the 11th hour for the lead and copper rule and all the revisions and the compliance for that rule. So kicking in on October 16th, which is right around the corner, what is your sense of preparedness among water providers in general, and what's still holding some utilities back?
Sure. Before I answer that question, though, I do want to add a little bit to what you just said about being in the 11th hour. Since the LCRI was proposed in December of 2023, that has pulled back many of the requirements that were going to be effective starting October 2024. So the 11th hour is not quite as extreme as it would have been, 6-7 months ago.
So we're back to like the 9th hour, the 8th hour. How far back are we going?
The 11th hour there's not quite as many requirements coming up by midnight. So right now, utilities are putting together their service line inventories, and the challenges with that are that the data is not as complete as anyone would like. From even just identifying where their service lines are located. Some utilities don't even use meters, so they don't even have an accurate count of meters or pipes that are connected to their main. And records are old, they're lost, they're in different locations, they're not as complete as they'd like. So just trying to pull all that together to even just get that initial inventory of pipes is a struggle for a lot of utilities. And then they're also required to include, if they know it, information about the material, which is buried underground.
Yep.
And many times not installed by the utility, not under the control of the utility when we're talking about the portion of the pipe that's on private property.
Yeah.
And so they just don't have any information about that. So that's very frustrating for, I think, everyone in the industry, that there's just not any information and they're being required to gather this information that simply does not exist.
Well, is there any help available for these municipalities that are struggling to be able to get the answers that's required of them?
Many states have technical assistance programs available. There's rural, I forget the name of the group, but there's some groups that focus on rural utilities. There's groups that focus on small utilities. So there is some technical assistance available. But at the end of the day, if there's no record, you have to go and physically inspect the pipe. So that means you're either digging it up because it's underground, or you're going inside private homes or buildings to look at the pipe coming through the wall or the floor of the structure.
That's actually true. I know of several instances where if there's piping sort of under the house and there's a crawl space, that municipalities are actually hiring or using as partners some consulting engineering firms where they go out and they have like the, in this case, maybe the CDM Smith name on the back of the desk, and they just come up and they let you know they're coming. They call ahead and they email and they say, we'll be there, on canvassing the area on Friday, whatever. And they'll show up and they'll say, do you mind if I crawl in your crawl space and see what kind of pipes you have in there? And it takes whole process takes about, I don't know, 5 minutes in total.
If you're lucky, if your water system has crawl spaces that are accessible from outside the house.
Right.
That's typical in shore towns and in the South, but in our areas where there's high water table. Most of the country, particularly in the North and the Northeast, things are buried and they're buried deeply. In St. Paul, I believe it's, I want to say 9 feet down. These pipes are 9 feet down below ground. So it's not something you can easily access just by, like you said, hiring a firm to just come along and take a look.
Makes sense. So it makes sense for the delay in some of these requirements.
Right. And Kristin, it sounds like from what you described that there's going to be a lot of unknown service line materials out there in the field. And
yes, there are.
You can correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe the notification part of having unknown service line materials is going to still be maintained. And that's due October 16th of this year. They're going to have to start sending out notifications. Utilities will, of any unknown line service line materials. So with the volume of that, are utilities really prepared for, what's coming as far as that goes?
It's a mixed bag. At many utilities, it's going to be a very high number of unknowns simply because of the private side of the service line that they don't know that information. It doesn't matter if they know the utility side and they know it's non-lead. If the customer side, the private side is not known, they still have to report that as an unknown service line and send that notification through whatever method their state requires or allows. Most states are doing letters. A few states have added you could do email or other ways of notification. But for the most part, it's going to be letters mailed out between, as you mentioned, October 16th and November 15th.
Right.
I'm honestly worried about the post office.
We don't get involved in politics, religion, or post office. We don't take a position on any of it, but that certainly is a legitimate concern, especially when you compare it to like email or phone or text or whatever. So I can understand that.
And if you think every mailed piece is approximately $1 or maybe slightly more between postage, the printing cost, and and actually getting it out the door. So you figure $1.25 per letter that's going out the door. So if you have 60,000 customers and you have 50,000 unknowns, you have to budget $60,000 to do that work that you were not expecting. And you have to procure, if you're municipally owned, and have to go through all the procurement process to hire a printing and mailing company. You got to put that takes time. You got to put that in place. So if you haven't started that process of figuring out how the logistics of it, now is the time. You absolutely need to be figuring that out now.
Well, great point.
Not just now is the time, but months ago was the time. But if you're listening to this right now and you're just thinking about getting started, then now is the time. But that makes sense because Kevin and I have talked to a number of municipalities directly. And Kevin, if you could let the audience know and let Kristin know how many overfunded municipalities we've come across in our travel.
Not many, I'd say zero.
There's zero.
Probably.
Yes, there's less than one, right? So to just magically have $60,000 appear, and of course that's an estimate, is a bit of a reach. So we certainly understand that being a hurdle.
I should point out that this law is not on municipalities. It's on water systems.
Right.
So water systems are a combination of just a department within city government, an authority,
good point,
or a privately owned system. It's the water system that's responsible, not so if your city is served by a private company, then that private company will be sending that out, not the city, not the town.
Right. So like in the case of like in New Jersey, I know that a lot of municipalities utilize like American Water, and American Water is the water firm the water company that services all of those
Correct.
uses.
So
Yeah.
Those notices will be coming from New Jersey American in
Right.
New Jersey.
I mean, great point to make. I appreciate you pointing that out. That is a great point to make. So that the one concern is water companies, water providers being behind somewhat and being able to map out what they're up against. So where the lead might actually be. But are there any other concerns out there about regarding potential gaps in LCRR compliance? And if so, can they be fixed by October 16th?
So it is perfectly within the regulation to submit an inventory on October 16th that has 100% unknown service lines in it. That is allowed.
Sounds like the quizzes I took in college.
I know.
Unknown.
All you have to do is list every single, minimum, list every customer you have.
Okay.
With an address. If there's multiple service lines at that address, you have to tag it with, an A, B, and C, something like that.
Right.
Just get that in. If you have all unknown materials in it, you'll still be in compliance. Now, you'll have to send a letter to every single one of those customers that you've identified as an unknown, telling them it's unknown, your material is unknown, and it might be lead. And here's the health risks of lead.
Got it.
So the plan really for utilities is to really plan for what comes next after that inventory. You really need to have a plan for customers call in, either they're upset or they want to find out information. How are you going to handle those calls? How are you going to respond to them? So having your customer service team prepped for that is important. Having materials on your website that answer some of those questions are important. But then also, you can't just leave it there. You have now, your obligation is to figure out what those unknowns are. And particularly with, I mentioned the LCRI that was proposed, it's expected to be finalized by October of 2024. That proposed LCRI gave a grace period of 3 years for utilities to figure this out, get their inventories as best as they can, because by the time the inventory is due again in late 2027, now utilities are going to have to start replacing service lines if they're lead, galvanized requiring replacement, or unknown. They have to investigate and replace that. So it's very important for the next 3 years to get your number of unknowns reduced as low as you possibly can, so that starting in 2028, you know where you need to target for replacements, which customers you really need to do outreach with. So that's what utilities really need to focus on now, is improving their inventory.
I mean, that's a good roadmap. So if you were to give one mission to the listeners out there and the users that are dealing with this is your mission. Try to minimize the unknowns as much as possible. It'd be great to have it at zero, but toward getting it as close to zero as you possibly can. So if we're talking in terms of next steps, I think that's a great place to start and aim for.
Right. And I would highly recommend that utilities consider predictive modeling or statistical analysis of their program of their utility, if the state will allow that.
Yeah.
That's where you take kind of you do random investigations at your unknowns, and then you can predict what the rest of your unknowns might be. And that can significantly reduce the number of investigations you need to do, because these investigations in themselves are going to be very expensive for utilities and very disruptive. Like I said, it's buried infrastructure. So you'll have to dig a hole in at least two places if the service line is unknown. So that in itself is a big burden on utilities, is doing those investigations. So I highly recommend predictive modeling and statistical analysis if your state will allow it.
Well, come to Water Online. We have a couple companies that do that, so that's good.
Yes, for those of you listening, looking for predictive analytics, we have plenty of companies represented on Water Online that would be more than happy, actually very excited to talk to.
Yeah.
For sure. And predictive modeling is just predictive modeling. So there's always the risk that the prediction is going to be wrong. So but just inherent to everything, cancer screening, other things where they're using statistics, there is the risk that the prediction will be wrong. So that's built into predictive modeling, but does the cost of doing the work outweigh the risk of a wrong prediction? That's kind of where the balance is. And that's what the states, like I said, the states are approving predictive modeling or not. That's what the states are grappling with right now, is what is that risk? How comfortable are they with that risk?
Makes sense.
Yeah. And if your state accepts that, that's great for the water provider.
Yeah.
What if you're a customer and you're still not sure on your private side if you have lead in your system and you want to know? Can they kind of like compel the water provider to do a manual check?
So on October 16th, when all these inventories across the entire country are going to be submitted to their state agencies, they are also supposed to make that information publicly available. So that would be your first step, would be check with your local water company.
Okay.
For the most part, they'll be on websites. If they're smaller than a certain size, they just need to be publicly available. That could be many locations, but I would check with them first to find out what information they have. You can also, the pipe comes into your home. Your side of the service line comes into your home. So you can also oftentimes help your water company by doing a self-inspection of at least your side of the service line. And then the water company should have a way for you to report that information to them, and guidance about how you can tell what materials there are. If you're still not sure, the water company and these letters that are going out are going to have steps that consumers can take to reduce their exposure to lead. And it's simple things like run your water for 5 minutes first thing in the morning, so that water that's been sitting in the pipe stagnant overnight and kind of collecting lead is flushed through, and then you have the fresh water that's coming through the pipes. You can use a pitcher filter that's certified to remove lead and make sure you replace the cartridges on time. But those are the two simplest things you can do if you're concerned, is just run your water so that the old water sitting in your pipes flushes out, and use a filter that removes lead. Make sure it says it is certified to remove lead.
Isn't there like a penny scrape test too you can do on your line?
That's if you want to test the material on your pipe.
Yeah.
Now, there is one thing that's been my personal mission is to talk to folks about lead-lined pipes. So this is something that the EPA hasn't really developed much guidance on, but it is absolutely an issue across the country, is that there are pipes that are one material on the outside, and they're lined with lead on the inside.
Ooh,
so doing a simple visual inspection of the pipe does not tell you what's on the inside of the pipe.
Okay.
So that's something I'm actually going to be publishing an article on this topic. And I've been in talking with the EPA, and I've been trying to develop some field methods with using like an X-ray gun where you can kind of see inside the pipe.
Cool.
Where you can have more information about what's inside the pipe. Now, if your pipe is copper, that's the penny test.
Right.
If it looks like a penny, it's not going to be lined with lead. They never did that. That's, as far as I know, that was never a thing. It's only if it were to be iron or steel, or galvanized iron or steel, then it could have a lead lining inside of it. We've found historic evidence of that in 23 states. Wow. So far. My firm, CDM Smith, has found that. And that's only because we've looked in 23 states so far.
Okay. 23 for 23.
Out there. Just absence of information doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We've found information about it in 23 states.
And counting.
So it's in the Northeast, definitely heavily used in the Northeast, Midwest, but we've also found it in Texas, California, Alabama, Florida. So it's everywhere.
Makes sense.
That lead lining in pipes.
Gotcha. You have mentioned it a couple times, but the lead and copper rule improvements, the LCRI, will be finalized, I believe, or scheduled to be on the same day that the other one. October 16th, that the LCRR becomes enforceable. So could you explain a little more on what's in and what's out, and how does LCRI build on LCRR?
So the LCRI is a combination of building on it and pulling back some of the LCRR. So some of the things that you say LCRR is enforceable in October 2024, that's actually not true. The LCRI and some guidance documents that have come out from the EPA since the draft proposed LCR was published have said the only things in the LCRR, that will be effective in October 2024 are submit your inventory, provide those notification letters to your customers about their materials, and then if you should have high levels, what's called an action level exceedance in your water, your normal compliance sampling, then the notifications after that event have changed. That's it. Everything else that was written into the LCRR has been delayed by this new LCRI proposal and the fact sheets and guidance that's come out since then.
I want to keep the focus on LCRI if I could. So, I mean, it's common knowledge that record keeping, good data, I mean, all that's good no matter what you're utilizing or what you're faced with. But those were lessons from LCRR and why some utilities or water companies, rather, perform better than others or fared better than others. Looking forward to LCRI, what are some crucial elements that utilities should have in place to set them up for success with that?
Like I said, try to get your inventory as clean as you possibly can, both through records review, and sometimes your records are in places you don't realize they're in.
Like what? Give me an example of that.
As we're doing our research for this lead-lined pipes, we have found purchasing records. We have found old insurance booklets where they interviewed water companies that said what types of materials they used at that time. I mean, we're talking back from the early 1900s. We found information about that. We found
where would you find that?
In council proceedings, they approved the purchase of lead pipes and blah, blah, blah. We have found records in unusual places.
Where would that even be? Like in the basement of some of these local buildings?
No.
I'm just curious, like where do you find this treasure trove?
Because the basement type records are gone.
Okay.
Or not in a form that you can really review too well.
Watch the Goonies too many times.
Yeah. Those types of records where they talk about systematic, like the system used all these materials during this time period, or certain materials were banned. Those tend to be in, honestly, like university libraries.
There you go.
They're in state libraries. They're in a whole bunch of different places. There is no one place to look for these. Again, that article that I'm about to publish will have some ideas of where you can find that type of information. But those kind of records don't tell you on the individual home level.
Makes sense. Right.
They just tell you about the practice of the time. Which can tell you lead was used, or you might be able to find a record that says lead is banned. And that's useful information as well.
Without a doubt, if you know that it's banned and you know it probably wasn't utilized.
I don't mean that a rogue plumber didn't use it, but it gives you at least a sense that right? But it gives you a sense that it's probably not there.
Right. I don't want to gloss over you mentioning this piece that you're about to publish. What can the market expect from it? Because I'm sure that we here at Water Online would love to help the promotion of it to get it out to the user base. But I'm just curious, like this piece that you're working on, what are some of the main points that you're going to hit in it?
The main point is, the angle we took was that lead line galvanized exists in a lot more places than originally thought. Lead line galvanized steel or iron. And that utilities do not know that it exists. I mean, that knowledge has been lost. I've had many utility workers tell me, "Oh, I swear it is not there. We've never seen it. We've never encountered it. It's not in a record anywhere. And then we go out and do some testing and we find it.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a hidden or a ghost material, I like to call it. So there's that, just this awareness that just because you think it's not there doesn't mean it's not there.
Right. Wishful thinking.
So maybe at least try to do some checking for it, either physically cutting the pipe, looking to see if there's a lead ring in there, or here's all these types of records or sources where you can at least do a deep dive into the historical record to see if it's mentioned. And then those records also are useful for just plain old lead pipes.
Right.
And types of other materials. So but that's where we found a lot of the information about lead lined pipes was in those old records, those old publicly available documents. You just have to, they're publicly available in odd places.
Right. It's finding where those odd spaces might be, but
old AWWA journals.
That's a good spot.
Where
It's a good source.
Literally, like meeting minutes were recorded in those old journals, and this superintendent reported the 3 materials they use in their system, and one of them is lead.
Okay.
That's where we're finding it.
Another good resource. Always a good resource.
Yeah, and that's just another layer of difficulty, having lead line pipes that don't look like they're lead.
For sure.
But at the end of the day, the mission was zero lead, right? For public health. So we got to get it all out. This whole thing, I guess, gathered steam with Flint. But now, like, we're not going to, water providers won't have to start taking out and replacing pipes, you say, until 2028. That's correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If the proposed LCRI, it stays the way it was proposed. Yeah. It had 10 years, 10-year replacement horizon starting in 2028.
Got it. And anything can happen between now and 2028. But as usual, all of you out there, Water Online will keep you updated as we go, as we move towards 2028. Any changes, updates, we will be certain to let you know. Kristin, I want to thank you for coming on air with us and helping us educate our audience, as well as Kevin and myself. Certainly appreciate
Thanks.
Without a doubt. I mean, there's a lot of good detail in there, and we had some fun along the way. I hope you had some fun. I appreciate it. I know our listeners, users, and viewers do as well. We cannot wait to have you back on the show. Kristin Epstein with CDM Smith. Look forward to having you back. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristin.
And for all of you out there, Water Online Show will be back soon with a new episode. And we thank you for spending your time here with us today. And we will see you soon.